Are you passionate about foreign policy, national security, and the latest in domestic politics? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, your go-to source for in-depth analysis and insightful discussions. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code GRADUATE to receive 30% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code GRADUATE. Thank you very much for your support.
This is Above Average Intelligence, a production of the DSR Network. Each week, hosts Marc and David Rothkopf are joined by leading experts from the intelligence community for expert analysis on the biggest security challenges around the world.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Marc and this is DSR's Above Average Intelligence Show. Today, I am honored to welcome as my guest, Mr. Pete Lapp, someone I've wanted to have on for some time. He retired as a special agent for the FBI after 22 years, either investigating or managing counterintelligence investigations involving Cuba, Russia, and China. Before joining the FBI, he worked as a police officer in Pennsylvania. He earned his bachelor's in criminal justice at West Chester University and his master's in criminal justice at St. Joe's University. He served several years in the Army National Guard as an infantry officer. After retiring from the FBI, Peter founded an independent consulting firm and conducts keynote speaking to help organizations mature their insider risk programs. Peter lives in Loudoun County, Virginia, just pretty close to where I am in Fairfax County. And most importantly, performs on the winery circuit as a singer and guitarist. His daughters say he's not intentionally well known. He's only county famous. Let me also say he's the author of Queen of Cuba, an FBI agent's insider account of the spy who evaded detection for 17 years, a fantastic book. But let's start off. I was going to start off with current events. We got to start off with music. I see you in the background. Got a whole bunch of guitars there. And I will say that I'm going to ask you your taste in music. This is someone right here. We're going off to Maine at the end of the month. On the way back, I'm stopping in New York City at Madison Square Garden in August, taking my 22-year-old son to see Slipknot, as I'm a crazy heavy metal fan. I've been to Metallica, Five Finger Death Punch, also Ice Nine Kills, all sorts of crazy concerts. As a 55-year-old, I might be kind of bucking the norm, but there you go. So what's your music taste?
I mean, I grew up on the Jersey Shore in the mid to late 80s, and I was too young for the Springsteen, although he was a legend in Jersey. It was Bon Jovi.
Oh yeah.
And Bon Jovi, came from the Jersey Shore area. And walking down the boardwalk of Seaside Heights, New Jersey, looking at, girls, what we do in high school, we just cruise. All you heard was "You Give Love a Bad Name" and "Living on a Prayer" and "Wanted Dead or Alive," and that to me became what I wanted to do in life, be the next John Bon Jovi, and I failed miserably at that.
Well, you know what? I will tell you, I am a huge John Bon Jovi fan as well. I've seen him many times in concert. A giant Springsteen fan too. The kind of crazy lore in my family is my uncle, who was a lawyer in the music business. He taught Max Weinberg how to play the drums up in the Catskills. So no one ever believes it, but it's true. And so my uncle was close to Clarence Clemens. So I'm just look. Bruce Springsteen was, for me growing up, was still, he was like Bon Jovi, but really that was religion. I mean, to think about Springsteen going to the Meadowlands and playing like 10 or 11 straight shows of 4 hours of pop. I don't think you see that again, but he's still going. We saw him last year. Unbelievable.
But being from Jersey, you would hear stories of people just running into Bruce, or running into John at the local wherever, and it was like, wow, your heroes, your icons. They go grocery shopping. They go get coffee. It's just for us in Jersey. Those were the what you aspired to want to be.
So what? Okay, so one last question. We're going to spend our whole time talking about New Jersey here, which is just fine. Some of the listeners are probably from New Jersey, but the beach we went to was Sandy Hook, 45 minutes from my house. Growing up in New Brunswick, What was your beach?
For family time, it was Long Beach Island.
Yep, LBI.
To a Catholic church down there in Beach Haven, and then but to cruise with my buddy Tony, it was Seaside Heights.
Love it.
That's where all the scenes were.
Something just popped in my head. This is 2010 at the U.S. Embassy in Amman, Jordan, Halloween, at the Marine House, a party, and I think I dressed like we were all dressed in like the Jersey Shore characters. I think I was the Situation.
Oh, nice.
So
that took a lot of alcohol.
All right. So let's jump into. I've wanted to have you on the show for some time because I think it's a lot of us in the intel. Well, first of all, thank you for your service, your outstanding career. But you are known, of course, in terms of your counterintelligence prowess, but very much so on Cuba. And it's something that it's fascinated me. I never worked Cuban operations, yet you keep hearing about, American officials who have been arrested for spying for Cuba. And I want to dive in today in terms of, maybe in a bit, just in terms of, how and why U.S. maybe some U.S. officials, had that those vulnerabilities, but also the prowess of the Cuban service. But most importantly, current events right now. What's popped into my kind of feed on social media? Russian warships are set for a port visit into Cuba. Is that, what's your thought on that? Is that specifically as Russia has now turned into an extraordinary adversary of the United States? Probably always was, but in our view. But what about this port visits? What's your thought on that?
Not surprising. But also rather diplomatically confrontational, kind of a thumb in the nose of the United States. I think when you think about Russia doing a port of call in Cuba, that sentence, you think more about Russia. And Cuba is the afterthought. And that's a theme, I think, that we've had, unfortunately, in the government, frankly, at both the FBI, the CIA, and others, where Cuba is kind of an afterthought in terms of the risk. I know a little bit about your experience with AAI,
right?
And if the 60 Minutes reporting is accurate, which I have no doubt about, this is just another example of Russia and Cuba's long strategic and intelligence relationship. And I talked to several former Cuban intelligence officers as I was writing my book, and we all agree that there is no doubt whoever did AAI, and I think the presumption is that it was Russia, they did it with the full cooperation of the Cuban intelligence service. There's no question. So it just is another example highlighting the relationship, but Cuba's the afterthought. And that's the disappointment that I have, having worked Cuba for as long as I did.
I certainly agree. And, one of the things I find incredible, there's maybe, I don't know, is it going down to Key West and thinking you're Ernest Hemingway, making his trips to Havana in the past, but Cuba is not, seen in the same sentence as some of our adversaries, but they should be. Particularly a country which, certainly doesn't have any, democratic norms, human rights issues, support of terrorism. But let's jump. What I think something that shocked some members, kind of in our circles. I bet it did not shock you, of course, but was the arrest of a former U.S. ambassador, Victor Rocha. Which, and I want you to talk about it a little bit, but just the kind of the sound bites on this were a 40-year operation, a seeding operation, someone who, reached kind of the pinnacle of the U.S. diplomatic establishment, but also into the National Security Council, other places.
Yep.
Pretty extraordinary. What are your thoughts on the Rocha op? And were you surprised?
Not surprised. I mean, I apparently knew the name. I was reminded by a friend and a bird on a wire that you did know his name. His name was in Ana Montez's computer that we found that led to her conviction. I will say it was not in there in a way where, hey, I know, moonlighting job, wasn't the spying. It was natural coordination that folks in the Cuba diplomatic government side do, it's not surprising. I think a lot of the folks that the unknown subjects that we had been looking at for years, they're now at that retirement age. They're out of government. They're into their golden years. And I think that it's another example of how patient Cuba is, and I think Rocha's comments to the undercover during the false flag, where he thought he was talking to a real Cuban intelligence officers, those are his real thoughts, not the bullshit he said. I don't know if we can say that, but the BS he said at his sentencing, where I was just naive and young and blah, blah, blah. His true thoughts were, we were comrades and we hit grand slams and we did great things. The Cubans are so good at finding those individuals that have a visceral empathy for what they're trying to accomplish. And they find people that are, and I know this is weird to say and hear, they're of higher character than a Robert Hansen and an Aldrich Ames, because they're not doing it for money. They're doing it for a greater moral belief in their mind. And therefore, I think the Cubans are so good at finding people that have a little higher character than the Russians do. But the damage is very similar, if not the same.
And I think that, when people think of Cuba, perhaps when they hear these espionage scandals, they don't, they might say, well, okay, why does that matter? But it matters for several reasons. One, of course, is they can certainly give up, penetrations that we have, putting people's lives at risk. But the other point of it, which I think you've talked about quite a bit, is the Cubans share counterintelligence information with our adversaries, like Russia, China, Iran. But let me just hop back to one thing. In my old world, when I got trained as a case officer, what you do is you look for individuals who, have things, what do we call it, placement and access. So you're almost looking for individuals to recruit in our hard target countries who are ready to provide information now. But the Cubans take the long view. So they're actually running what we call seeding operations. They're taking, they're recruiting individuals they have perhaps in college. And again, as you said, finding those with kind of who are ideologically committed. But, in our system, in the U.S. intelligence community, and I think probably the FBI as well, who do run recruitment operations, domestically against foreign hard target diplomats. But we don't get rewarded for that. If you say, hey, I recruited a kid who we're going to try to seed into the Russian diplomatic service years out, first of all, you might not even get approval to do that. And so I think their system is such in which that patience is frankly rewarded, and when in our system it's not.
When Anna was recruited, she already had a clearance. She already worked at the Department of Justice, and her aspiration once she finished her master's degree, which is where she was spotted and assessed and soft pitched, was to go to Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, an NGO, and then she met the Cubans. So then she was pivoting to wanting to go to the intelligence community, which was not something that she ever considered. You're right. They seeded and found somebody. My point is, one of the individuals that were part of that recruitment commented that she's going to be one of the best ever. And therefore, and it's hard to argue and hard to debate because we don't know about the ones that we don't know about. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I think she was one of the best that they ever had. And their patience with Rocha. Rocha did assignments. I think he did an assignment in Italy for 2 years. And okay, what's he going to give them? Nothing. But the Cubans were patient in saying, you need to do this assignment because it's going to lead you to an even greater position. And I think he probably was tracking professionally to want to be an ambassador in Latin America, which the Cubans would have greatly aspired for him as well.
Right. I think that's again, it's the different systems in terms of patience. One of the things when I think about Cuban operations, and so let's say I entered the agency in 1993, retired in 2019, but I did have some friends who were involved in Cuban operations, but for lack of a better term, that wasn't the sexy thing to do. There was a war on terrorism going on after 9/11. But just like Russia never stopped spying, the Cubans never stopped spying on us. So, do you subscribe to that notion that, with some of these hard targets that just this understandable, I suppose, focus on counterterrorism, it's what I did, frankly, but that we ended up taking our eye off the ball on some of these hard targets, and perhaps even on counterintelligence. For example, I worked at the JTTF in New York. There is, and we can't talk about it all that much, but there is a limited number of surveillance teams that you have at your disposal, and sometimes there's a bodega in Queens run by some Yemeni who has ties back to Al Qaeda that's going to take priority. Did you get that sense that the kind of the GWAT did have an effect on kind of required perhaps focus on counterintelligence and particularly the Cubans?
Well, absolutely. All you hear from the FBI is China, Russia, China, Russia, China, Russia, China, China, China. And I get it. I understand. Cuba will never be that tier of an intelligence threat, a military threat to the United States as a China or a Russia. So I understand the context. The Cuban intelligence service internally is structured by departments. And their first department, M1, is the United States. That is their top priority. And for us, the United States, Cuba is a solid third. It is what it is, but when you have that imbalance, you're going to have a lack of attention. I look at internally at the FBI, the assistant director for counterintelligence is the top counterintelligence official for the FBI. He or she did not come up through the ranks working Cuba exclusively. It's never happened. You either have worked Russia or China. And in these days, it's probably more China than Russia. So that just kind of gives you a vignette as to where the U.S. government's focus is. And I can't say I would, if I was king for a day, I would change things around, but I certainly would take some of those resources and emphasis and make sure the folks that are working Cuba are energized, are resourced, and have everything they need to do to make sure that we're kind of trying to balance this out between the efforts they're projecting against us and what we're projecting backwards.
Let's go back to the book. Once again, of course, I'm going to plug your book a little bit. Again, the title is Queen of Cuba, an FBI agent's insider account of the spy who evaded detection for 17 years. Talk to us a little bit about the Ana Montes story. Tell the story from, in a couple minutes from kind of beginning to end, and perhaps just, and I think that what our listeners will be most interested is the time you actually spent across from her in debriefs. And to me, the psychology of espionage has always been the most fascinating part. I mean, when I talk to college kids about life in the intelligence community, they say, "What class should I take? Should I take cyber classes?" I say, "No, take Psych 101, 201, and then 501." So, talk to us about Ana Montes and your experiences.
Ana's the oldest of 4 children, very proud Puerto Rican family. Mom and dad divorced when she was in high school, raised very morally, pretty close family. Dad was a military officer in and out of the Army as a psychiatrist, and mom worked in government. Ana's sister, Lucy, and Ana's brother, Tito, end up going to work for the FBI. Tito was an agent, and Lucy was a translator, and they both retired honorably. Good family, and Ana, well-educated, very intelligent person to this day, is super smart, does have a caring heart, but in a different place with a different set of values, if you will, and went to Johns Hopkins as a grad student and was spotted and assessed by an American woman, also Puerto Rican. And they met a Cuban, and the rest is kind of history. Unique in the sense that Ana went to DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, solely for the purpose of spying for Cuba. And that is incredibly unique. The fact that she's a she is incredibly unique. We did a 60 Minutes piece that aired 3 or 4 weeks ago on May 18th, and I really am very proud of it. And off camera, I was talking with the correspondent, who is a woman, Cecilia, and I said, "Be honest with me. if Anna's a man, are we sitting down today? And she said, absolutely not. So her gender is unique. The fact that she spied and didn't get money is unique. And the fact that she went in day one fully recruited is unique. Anna is kind of an ideological spy. She's put in that bucket of, the mice bucket of ideology. I argue that she's more anti-American. She really dislikes our country. It's kind of a relationship. We're all in relationships. And there are times in these relationships where we don't focus on the good that the other person brings. We only focus on the bad. Anna's relationship with the United States is that she just focuses on the bad. And there have been bad things that this country has done, our country has done over the years, but she focuses on those. And that's the representative attitude that she has to the United States. And it's amazing to me that she has that attitude to this day and now is free living in our country. Doesn't want to go to Cuba, even though, that's just that to me. And I get there's some family reasons, she wants to spend time with mom, and that's okay. I get that. But if you liked Cuba so much, by all means, I'll hold the door open for you, but no, it's not good enough of a place for you to live. You want to stay here in the United States. That hypocrisy I have plenty of examples of that we could talk for hours.
One of the things that I think that listeners should understand is, again, in our world, and it's an insular world, but if there's a National Security Council meeting, and you're talking about, the Cuban issue, there are probably, a handful, maybe on, two hands, 10 senior officials who are going to be invited to that meeting. As the top DIA analyst for Cuba, she's at that meeting every time. That's extraordinary to me. Their ability to, in essence, run as an agent, the top analyst at DIA, who also, because of perhaps her reputation, and you tell me if this is true, would be able to elicit information throughout the U.S. government because of kind of her stature. Talk a little bit about that, because perhaps she did not only provide information that she, obtained from reading documents, cable traffic, but also from her stature as the lead official at one of our, intelligence agencies on Cuba.
Here's her internal tension, right? Intelligent person. So whatever vocation she goes into, she's going to give it her all. The flip side is that she hates the U.S. government. She considers the Department of Defense the war machine. She hates her colleagues because they believe in the United States and believe in their mission. But the better she does at her job, the more doors it opens. So she had to kind of force herself to be as good an analyst as her skills allowed her, which was incredible. Because that opened more doors, got her invited to more meetings, opened, more accesses. She gets read into a special access program in 1997 that is incredibly damaging to the United States. It's a program that I found on her computer. So that kind of thing is an internal struggle that she has for all of her career. And it benefited the Cubans immensely, her ability to kind of focus on her job, do it as well as she could. And really, there were people, there's a vignette in the book, that someone from NSA, the National Security Agency, was looking for someone at DOD to talk to about a specific issue. And she talked to a colleague, and that colleague at NSA said, Ana Montes. You should talk to Ana Montes. And what the NSA colleague wanted to talk to someone at DOD about was the unsub who became Ana Montes. It's like, that it's amazing that they didn't connect. And that just gives you the sense of Anna's reputation throughout the rest of the intelligence community.
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking, of course, the difficulties not only in keeping. So this is from the Cuban perspective. So you have to keep your asset alive, which would be Ana Montes, But also there must have been, and again, we're talking about psychology as a key aspect in running and recruiting agents, but the notion of her hatred towards the United States from the Cuban intelligence handler's perspective, that must have been very interesting, because what I found from assets from hard target countries is in those times where there was communications with your asset, whether that's a sit down meeting at a hotel, even a brief meeting on a park bench. I mean, that's their only outlet.
Yeah.
And so did you get a sense of when Anna was able to meet with her handlers or one-on-one or whatever the circumstance, was that her outlet? Because if you think about this career in spying, everything is, and especially her kind of pathological hatred towards the United States, she probably needed that personal contact. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great point. And coming from your background and experience, it's super, super interesting. I can tell you, my partner Steve and I, when we found out from her that she would meet at lunch in a public restaurant for 2 to 3 hours every 2 to 3 weeks, from an operational security perspective, it blew our mind. The guy sitting across the table was a Cuban intelligence officer here illegally, not recognized by the State Department. If we caught them in the act, he's going to jail too. He didn't have diplomatic immunity. So our thinking as FBI agents was very, this is really poor operational security. In writing the book, my co-writer, Kelly Kennedy, obviously a woman, said, Pete, you're looking at this from the wrong perspective. As a woman, for 17 years, not being able to have long, intimate relationships because you have the methodology and you just can't have two lives. This was her emotional intimacy lifeline. Yep. That guy sitting across the table from her, totally platonic, knew everything about her, knew more about her than her own mother. And therefore, that is what sustained her through this life of torture, frankly, that she described it to us for the 17 years. And they had different ways of doing it over the years, but the more common aspect was sitting down, sliding a disc across the table at lunch, and then talking for 2 hours. And that was I had a chance to rewatch day one's debriefing as part of getting ready for the 60 Minutes segment. And she interrupted us when we talked about her illegal officers. And she said, look, you can call them whenever you want to, but I'm going to call them my friends.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I'm getting chills even thinking about this because, I remember when I've been describing what I missed the most about the agency, certainly it's some of my colleagues, but actually it's the agents, the assets that we recruited and the incredible personal bond that you formed.
Yeah.
I remember when I was training an Arab diplomat to go back into his host country. We're doing it on the streets of Europe, and he took me aside one time and he said, Marc, look, and I know we're going to meet once a month. It's going to be, we have communications equipment, might be a brush pass or something. Super high threat environment. But he said, I just want to let you know that I'm going to think about you every day because if you make one mistake, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
And so it was such a powerful statement. And so your relationship with this other human being, when you have their life in their hands, this is a little bit from my perspective, but also what they're thinking too. Anyhow, unfortunately, I think the Cubans were obviously good at this. Let me put you on the spot for 1 second.
And not just you, but the CIA, right? It's you represent the entire agency, and it's like I'm putting my life in your hands, which I think I know this is not a direction you probably plan to go. This is why the Mar-a-Lago thing was so damaging, because you've got human information. If I'm a source in another country, the honor that the president of the United States is reading my intelligence, you know this better than I do, is huge. Yeah, my shit's being read by POTUS, and now I would want my stuff going to a POTUS because of what we've seen in recent. I'm sorry, we got off on a tangent. That's just what really ticks me off about.
But those are the promises that we make to assets in order to keep them secure. I mean, that is absolutely sacrosanct. But I do want to put you on the spot just for a second, and it's a little political, because this is so controversial about what should U.S. policy towards Cuba be. And, one of the things with my experiences, of course, with my health issues with Havana syndrome, I've gotten to know members of the kind of the exiled Cuban community down in Miami. And in some ways, I'm a little more sympathetic towards them. I'm not a giant fan of the Cuban regime. And there was a time in previous administrations where we really kind of pushed this rapprochement. What should we be doing right now? And because I don't have the right answer on this, although I've become much more hardline, I must say, in the last couple of years. But what are your thoughts?
Well, that community down there is incredibly passionate, and there is anything short of a public square hanging is like a failure for the U.S. government. And I will say, what's kind of bothered me about Rocha and his sentence, I came out and said his sentence is phenomenal, and some of the folks that follow me on X, Cuban Americans, some I've met, some I have not, were like, this is not the Biden administration. Is they have their fingers in this, and he blah 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 blah. And I said, look, I can tell you, the Bush administration had nothing to do with Montez's 25-year sentence. Period. This is not a political issue. Neither administration gets involved in a plea agreement. I honestly don't know the right posture that we should have. Nothing has worked. Nothing has worked. The embargo has not worked. It has not changed any regime. Although the Castros have died and retired, it's the same government. It's the same oppressed government that oppresses the Cuban people. I don't know the right political answer in terms of what's the best policy. If we flooded Cuba with Hilton hotels and 5-star hotels, would that change? I don't know. I mean, the folks that I've talked to, the former Cuban intelligence officers for the book, they did it because they spied against their own country because of the corruption. And therefore, what's going to lead to less corruption? I don't know that anything will. I hate to say it, I don't have a good answer for you. And I'm not trying to dodge. I don't know. I think if anyone knew, we would probably try and implement it. But, the embargo is not providing the desired result. So what else is there? I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's certainly something, and I wonder if we're going to see this in the upcoming presidential campaign. I'm not sure, but it always seems to be an issue. Let me just kind of switch quickly to just the state of U.S. counterintelligence now in 2024. I guess the questions are, give us a ranking of your top maybe 3 or 4 counterintelligence threats. And then, of course, the most important notion, I think, is the FBI and the intelligence community kind of well-positioned to counter this. And just put this back in the perspective of, again, during that GWAT, the 20-year war on terrorism, I think we did take our eye off the ball a bit. But how are we right now, the state of U.S. counterintelligence in 2024? Where should we be most concerned?
Divisiveness and disgruntlement and grievances. China and Russia will always do what they do in terms of looking for insiders that are going to betray the United States, but grievances, policy grievances, not necessarily political grievances, but policy grievances. Anna spied because of Reagan's policy in El Salvador. I doubt she supported Ronald Reagan in the election. I don't know for sure. But Anna continued to spy during the Clinton administration because he didn't change the policy. We were just talking about the policy in Cuba.
Right.
So she did as much damage during a Clinton administration, which I presume, given what her family has told me, that she probably voted for Bill Clinton versus his opponent. I think grievances and disgruntlement, we are ripe for incubating the next Ana Montes in today's environment, whether it's with Ukraine and whether you're for or against supporting Ukraine, or whether it's Israel and Gaza, for or against. That's our biggest counterintelligence issue. And if the challenge is, because our country is so focused constitutionally, and I completely support it. The First Amendment is one of the greatest freedoms that we can have, one of the greatest human rights that we can have, and it's difficult for the government to figure out, what does someone really believe? and what are they saying online? Is that what they really believe?
Right.
And do they have a clearance? And do they work for the CIA, the FBI? Should we be concerned about them, or is it part of the civil liberties and protection of their freedom of thought and expression that we have to be cognizant of? That's probably, I think, our biggest counterintelligence challenge, because we can't, if we're looking at insider threats as the big issue, and I think it should be, where do we get better as a government trying to sort people that are just bitching and people that are really taking that for a call to action and ready to go be the next Montez, Rocha, Daniel Hale, reality winner, you name them, they continue on. Ed Snowden, right? Or as I like to call him, Eddie, until he blocked me on X.
I think I know the answer to this question, so I guess but I have to throw it out there. Are there others still out there? Are there others, U.S. officials spying for our adversaries?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no question. I mean, we're naive to think that this is just a history book or a story from the past. No, it continues to happen. And there absolutely are people within our government who are loyal to other governments and not ours. And that will be, we've been working on the insider threat since Cain and Abel. Jesus had to worry about all of them, but one in particular betrayed him. He was an insider threat. So this is not something that is a post-World War II, so cool, sexy James Bond movie, James Bourne kind of stuff, Jason Bourne. It's going to forever because the most weakest link we have is our greatest assets, and those are the human beings that we hire to put in these very delicate, sensitive positions.
And first of all, the espionage is the second oldest profession.
Yep,
love that note. But people are fallible. I think about back in my, throughout my career, there were several individuals who I knew personally who were arrested for espionage. And regardless of what everybody says, of course, when this happens, everyone said, "Well, I knew something was up with X, Y, or Z." Well, bullshit. Because everybody has their weird quirks.
Yeah, I worked for Charlie McGonigal. I have the distinction of getting fired by Charlie McGonigal. And,
well,
I think I wear it as a badge of honor now. Now, he wasn't a spy, but, he did some bad things towards the end of his career, and no one
went
knew.
Wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So human nature is we're all influenced by factors, divorces, hardships, political grievances, all of these different things. And the human being is really a tough nugget to crack.
Well, Pete, so this is the point in the podcast where we have to say goodbye to our guests who are not yet subscribers. If you want to listen to the rest of the podcast and to all of the other shows in full, just go to the dsrnetwork.com and click on membership. It's only $7 a month, and it brings you a lot of great bonus content. If you're not a subscriber, we hope you will be soon. And if you are one, stand by. We will be right back.
Thank you for listening to Above Average Intelligence, hosted every week by Marc Polymeropoulos and David Rothkopf. Above Average Intelligence is a production of the DSR Network and was produced by Riley Fessler.